Welcome back to Relatable Wisdom, the podcast where everyday people share the quotes that shaped how they see life, offering you gentle wisdom to carry into your own daily journey. Today's guest is Reverend Dr. Chotka, a minister and author who spent decades helping people recognize that God has been speaking with them all along. They just didn't realize it. David has this beautiful conviction that the extraordinary is woven right into our ordinary moments, and his heart is all about making the mystical feel accessible. Let's step into David's world for a few minutes and hear the words that have anchored his faith. Can you tell me your name and what you...
Yes. David Chotka. Okay, it's on the screen. And I am the founder and director of a charitable organization in Canada with a 501c3 in the United States. And I equip spiritual disciplines for a living. That's what I do. I have been a pastor in the Christian Missionary Alliance for a long time. And I just got back, you're talking about 4 days ago, I just got back from the Philippines and Vietnam, where I led conference teaching ministry activity for 4,000 delegates at a convention in Palawan, south of Manila. And then I did a pastor's retreat for about 150 pastors in Vietnam. Now, this is amazing because it used to be very communist, and they didn't allow faith. And so being able to go, but it wasn't my idea the way that I got there either. So the whole point of what I live around is if it's not my idea, it's probably his. There you go. That's what the way I live. I'm the founder and director of Spirit Equipped Ministries. Now that's on the bio. That's in the Podmatch. Did you find me on Podmatch? Is that where you found me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm also a co-host of a podcast myself. I'm on a podcast called The Graceful Warrior, and we talk about principles of spiritual living.
Yeah. What's your favorite quotes? I know you did share it earlier on with me, but for the sake of easy recording, I'll ask you.
God initiates, we respond.
Okay. So I know everything you. I feel like I understand it, but I'd love for you to explain with the context so I can really understand.
Sure. Virtually everything in life that I've done that's been any kind of successful thing was not something that I tried to do. It's something that I tripped into when I decided to follow the Lord. So actually, if you ask me to tell a story about that, I'll tell you the story from this one here. This is one of my books. It's called, Hey, Are You There? It's Me, God, How to Listen, Test, and Know When God Speaks. The first story in this book inspired the guy who wrote the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. And it's about me tripping into a friendship that was unexpected. And it would be wonderful to tell that story to set up the whole thing. Okay, so what the point is that you could say, it's not my idea. You could start there. It wasn't my idea. That includes marrying the girl that I married.
Wow.
So that there's a long story attached to that, but suffice it to say that my heart was broken because the girl I wanted to married somebody else. I was broken of heart, and I decided to go to school. And I wanted to save costs to move from one location to another. And so there was somebody in my congregation who was moving to the same city. She had a friend who was moving to the same city. We said, well, if we combine all these things, that's just fine. It'll make it a lot cheaper. And it did. It was about a third the cost. Anyway, I wound up sitting in an empty apartment because the guy who was supposed to deliver our stuff went on vacation for 10 days. So I was beside this girl who I did not know for 10 consecutive days. And I just, my heart was broken. So I wasn't interested in doing anything other than just getting my stuff and getting out of there. But in the end, we became great friends because we were sharing our misery together. In the court, because our stuff was still in that moving van, including our phones and my books and my bed, and everything that I had was in that moving van. And most everything she had was in that moving van. And we were stuck in this empty apartment for like 10 days. And then finally the guy showed up, and here's what happened. The company hired him at last minute. He was a casual worker. He was driving with our stuff through a beautiful area that was filled with mountains and rivers and lakes and trees. And he decided to stop with his son and go fishing. So I wound up next to the girl that I would marry for 10 consecutive days and nights. We started off by being friends. And in the course of time, we discovered that we cared for each other and married each other. But I didn't try and do that. All I was trying to do was move my stuff from one location to another at an inexpensive price.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes, we could start with that if you want. There's all kinds of these that I'm just anyway. You start. The whole point is that God sets it up and I follow. That's what it boils down to. And the way I say it in compact language is God initiates, we respond.
Yeah, God initiates worship. I
That's
think
it.
I think y- for me now the issue I'm having right now is when he initiates most of the time, we're not even aware that we can't even see it, right? So
You're right. You're
we don't
absolutely
even know that something's going on, let alone thinking of response.
absolutely right. That's the adventure. So let me start off by telling you the story of how I met Tim and Sarah, because that's exactly the point. I had not a clue that God was using me in a miraculous, marvelous kind of way. And that story would set it up, and it's funny. It's a hilarious story.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's take a quick pause. If you're enjoying this conversation and want more thought-provoking ideas straight to your inbox, join the Relatable Wisdom email list. It's free, quick, and filled with bite-sized insights, inspiring quotes, and behind-the-scenes reflections from our guests. Just head to relatablewisdom.com/join. That is relatablewisdom.com/join. Or tap the link in the show notes. And hey, subscribing to the podcast helps more than you think, and it's free. So if you haven't already, hit that follow button wherever you're listening. All right, let's get back to the conversation.
Okay. Well, let me tell you the defining phrase for my entire life, from the time I was a young lad all the way through to my present age, which I don't want to tell you because I'm getting too old, is that God initiates and we respond. And so one night I was getting ready to go to bed, and I noticed that, and I wanted some milk out of the refrigerator. I got the milk out, and my daughter always had milk on her breakfast. She wanted milk on her breakfast, or she'd have a real hard time eating that. And it was about 20 minutes to 10 o'clock at night, and the store where I could get the milk was about a 10-minute drive away. So I yelled up to my wife and I said, "Listen, Liz, I'm on my way. I'm going to get some milk for Jessica's breakfast tomorrow morning." So get in the car. I close the door and I turn on the radio as I'm starting to drive toward the grocery store. And there's only one in town. It's going to close in 10, 15 minutes, and I have to get there fast. And it was about a 10-minute drive. As I'm driving, suddenly my very favorite hymn comes over the radio, and I am absolutely amazed and astonished by that hymn. It was a song that had blessed my heart, and it filled my heart with joy. And I started to sing that song. It was actually a song about inner healing and being transformed by grace on the inside. And it had been a song that I had learned because I needed to get well inside. Anyway, I'm driving along, I'm singing this song, and I'm so moved by what I'm singing, I drive right past the driveway of the grocery store. And so as I'm driving along, I realize I passed the store and I've got like 7 or 8 minutes left. And I turn around, and my father had just passed away, and he had a favorite hymn, and you probably know it. Anyway, I was driving back to get to that store, and What a Friend We Have in Jesus came over the radio. Now, I remembered him singing that thing with a terrible off-key voice as he worked, laboring away. He couldn't sing. He couldn't hold a tune if you put it in a bucket and gave it to him to carry. Anyway, he had a terrible voice, but his heart was good, and I had this memory of him, and I was still grieving the loss, and I drove right past the driveway again. And so I realized by now that if I turned around, it was going to be too late. But these beautiful hymns were coming over the radio. And I belonged to a church that didn't sing those very much anymore. They were singing these modern things. Jesus loves you, yeah, 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 kind of thing. And I like content, see. I like lots of content. And so one of these beautiful hymns comes on, and I'm starting to sing this song, and I'm worshiping the Lord, and I'm in the divine presence, and it's just marvelous. And it's so intense and so focused that I'm starting not to be in control of the vehicle, and I realize I better pull the car over somewhere. So I pulled the car into a driveway, and I closed my eyes to listen to this beautiful hymn that was going on, and I basked in the warm afterglow of this beautiful music. And then I don't know what I was doing, but I just wanted to sit there and bask in it. I turned the car off, and the sound of the engine diminished, and I was in this quiet as I was just, reverentially worshiping God. And I got out of the car, and I walked up to a doorway that I'd never been to in my entire life, and I knocked on the door at 10 o'clock at night, or 10:15 or something like this. It was late. No, and it wasn't 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which is the ordinary time to do a visit. It was 10:15 or 10:20 at night. And I thought, what am I doing? I don't know this house. I've never been here before. What am I doing? And I decided that I would probably try and turn and walk away when suddenly I heard voices on the other side of the door. And the door opens, and it's a couple that had just started visiting my church. And I knew them because the guy had tattoos from his head all the way down to his fingernails, and they were dark blue tattoos, and he had ear gauge expander earrings in his ears, and he looked like a great big tough motorcycle guy, and he was married to this cute little female church girl, you know. And when I met them at the door, I got their names because that was the game. If somebody would come to my church, I'd get their names, and I'd say, hey, if you come back next week, let's see if I can get your names right. And we'd have a little game of it. Anyway, I looked at them, and I said, Tim, Sarah, how you doing? And they said, Pastor David, you're here. I said, well, yes, I am. And then the girl starts giving the elbow to her guy like this, just like this. And she said, Tim, you see, it's true. It's true. God answers prayer. God answers prayer. And she starts to laugh and she starts to cry. And then he looks at her and she looks at me and he starts to laugh and then he starts to cry. And I said, what's going on? And they invited me in. And here's the story in the background. They were a Christian. They were a new couple. He liked the girl, and he said to the girl, hey, I'd like to take you out. And she said, are you a Christian believer? And he said, no. And then she said, I only date Christians. So if you want to date me, you can sit next to me in church. You can come to our home for lunch after with my dad sitting there. But otherwise, I don't go out with guys who are not believers. Anyway, over the course of several weeks of doing this, he really liked the girl. And then he said yes to the claims of Christ. But and they got married. And so dad discipled him and they were all doing this wonderful thing. Anyway, when the day was all said and done, they wound up coming to my church because they moved there for work, you know, and they had just purchased their home, and it was considerably less expensive to live in my city than it was to live in the big city, and that's why they did that. But they started to argue, and they had a terrible argument that night, and they started saying things to each other that were hurting each other, and then they both at the same time realized that what they were doing was terribly wrong and that God was not pleased. And they put their arms around each other. They begged forgiveness from each other. They collapsed onto the floor and they said this, oh God, we need help. We need help. We need it right now. Send Pastor David. Send him to us right now. Send him to us. And there I am singing hymns, and I pull up in their driveway. And then I walk up to the door and knock on the door at 10:15 at night. And the result of that was that there was a series of counseling steps that happened. They became great friends. And to this day, in fact, I just tried to call them yesterday, Tim and Sarah, and that was fully, 6 or 7 or 8 years ago when this thing happened. They were praying that God would send me to their home, and I was distracted by singing these beautiful hymns and pulling into a driveway because my driving was getting erratic. Now listen, when it's done, I just have to tell you this. I didn't do that. That was not me. And yet significant things came out of that time where I tripped into getting to know Tim and Sarah, not because they came to the church and I knew their name, but because I wound up at their door at night when they prayed specifically for me to come at a time when nobody would come. And it was only because my daughter needed milk for her breakfast the next morning that I was even considering to be in that car. So the principle behind this is God initiates. We respond. We respond. Actually, that just happened. So I was just in Vietnam, and I don't speak Vietnamese. And the reason I went to Vietnam is because one of my books, I don't know if I have it handy here, one of my books got translated into Vietnamese. And the people who got it translated were two ladies, both from Australia. I met them when I was doing a conference in Australia. And they said, we need to get your book into Vietnamese and then get it into Vietnam itself. I said, oh, isn't that nice? Meanwhile, the president of the denomination invited me to be the theme speaker at a major event. He didn't know where it was going to happen. And it turned out that the event was going to be in Vietnam. Oh. And so these two girls made the decision to get to work on translating my book into Vietnamese. Meanwhile, another person who was not connected to them invited me to go to a major conference. And as a result, I wound up giving away 2,000 copies of that book. And there was a second occasion where I had extra money in the fund. I wanted to return and to complete my promise because once you receive monies for a Canadian charity, you have to spend everything that's given to you around whatever topic or theme you've picked. And I picked the Vietnamese mission. And I had enough money left over for books to go to the north. And so I was in the Philippines and I was hesitating. And then these two ladies contacted me and said, we're going to be in Vietnam. Do you want us to come and join you for this event that you're going to be doing? And they wound up interpreting for me. And they wound up being present for me at the airport. And we got to the same hotel we were supposed to stay and so on. My wife and I were together in that trip. At any rate, the bottom line was, I didn't do that. It wasn't my idea.
Yeah. For earlier on, I said, yeah, God always initiates, right?
Yeah.
He fulfills his own end of the bargain. But
Yep.
but it's just that we don't respond, right? And that's
Yes.
the thing. Sometimes we're not even aware that like in your own case, what was happening, you were not even aware, but it just happens that you responded and everything worked. And now you're looking at, yeah, God initiated it, I respond. But sometimes we're not even aware and the thing goes on. And in retrospect, we look at it and, yeah, God was initiating something for me. What happened? Why couldn't I just see it? Why couldn't I just, respond? And
Well, you're putting your finger on one of the most important issues for everyday believers. The most important issue is, can you know when God is trying to get your attention? And so I wrote a book on this. Actually, the book I just showed you a minute ago. Hey, are you there? It's me, God. How to listen, test, and know when God speaks. I'm going to give you the short form. I don't know what your spiritual gifts are. I don't know where your talents lie. I simply don't know that because we've just met each other. But I can tell you that every kind of Christian across the face of planet Earth, whether you're talking about a Catholic or a Baptist or a Pentecostal, whether you're talking about a Methodist or an Episcopalian, an Anglican, whether you're talking about a Presbyterian, all of them, every kind of Christian, male, female, young, and old, gets these three identity markers. It shows up in the book of Romans, chapter 14, verse 17, says this: the kingdom of God is not about eating and drinking. It's about righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So let me define them. So that's a verse from Romans chapter 14, verse 17. It says, kingdom of God consists of three things. Righteousness, which is a sweet walk with your God. And if your walk with God is sweet, you know you're doing the right thing. If your walk with God is bad, you know you're in trouble. Secondly, peace, which is internal serenity. And that's where you have this marvelous sense of being completely at ease inside yourself, in your own skin, and at ease with the Lord himself. The third one is joy, which is internal celebration despite external circumstance. Now, when all three of those come together while you are thinking about something that you're supposed to be doing, and suddenly they get bigger, that's him. That's God. Now, whenever we think about God talking, we think about, the Christmas story, the angels in the sky, and the virgin seeing the big angel telling her that she's going to become the mother of Christ. And, Joseph being told that his pregnant wife was not unfaithful. Or we think about the burning bush in Moses in the Old Testament. And we think about the stars in the sky being moved for the Magi and the big things like that. What we don't pay attention to is that the New Testament describes those three identity markers as belonging to everyone. And when the presence rises inside of you, while you are pondering what you're supposed to be doing, you discover that you're being led into things that you never considered before. That's how you know. Now, I can tell you this. I've done conferences in 22 nations now, 22. It doesn't matter what kind of group I'm talking to. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to African tribals, or if I'm talking to Filipino textile workers, or if I'm talking to Vietnamese former communists, or if I'm talking to North Americans who, are individualistic to beat the band. It doesn't matter if that's a male or a female, young or old. When I say this, they all nod their heads. How many here have walked into a room and suddenly all your peace left? They'll all nod their head. And then I'll say, was it a bad idea to be in the room? And then they'll say, yes. I said, that's God talking. Or what about one of those times where you walked into the room and suddenly all the joy just got big and the peace got large and you felt completely at ease and completely at home? Was that a time when something good was happening? And they'll nod their head and I'll say, that's God talking. And so the Lord speaks primarily non-verbally and by presence. The presence waxes large or the presence diminishes. And it's defined by those three identity markers: a sweet walk with God, internal serenity, and joy on the inside, even if things are bad on the outside. And when you put all three of those together and all three show up at the same time, you should pay attention to what's happening.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
thank you so much, Dr. David. I love the way you give it so of course, this is a very deep topic that takes a lot of time, but the way you found a way to not just give us summary, but actually give us something we can make sense of and actually take away and say, okay, yeah, I learned this thing and this is the next thing I'll learn. And then later on, maybe 5 years from now, say, I remember that time I listened to the podcast episode and this young man, Dr. David, he was like, he explained this romance stuff. Yeah, it's this idea. And thank you so much for doing.
Oh, you're welcome. Actually, it's the center of the book I showed you.
Yeah.
And I did my doctoral work in how to hear the voice of God and how to know when he's talking to you. And then I looked in church history and I found examples of people who had experiences like that. And I compared that to biblical accounts. The book is called, Hey, Are You There? It's Me, God. And the subtitle is How to Listen, Test, and Know When God Speaks. And it's a fun book because it always has a story. Sometimes it's a personal story. Sometimes it's an historical story. Sometimes it's a contemporary pure story. But there's always a story that speaks to the principle of how God speaks. And I give 25 different ways that God speaks to you. 25 different ways. And then in the 6th week, I bring together all of those 25 different things into a grid so that people can make decisions around how to listen to the voice of God guiding and directing them. But yes, if you pushed me into a corner and you said, give me one thing that I can use from this, it's that Romans 14, verse 17, righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. David. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight. Like just listening to you. So at a point, every split seconds, I forget that I'm the host. I'm like I feel like I'm I'm a listener, and then I question myself. I say, young man, you're supposed to like ask a follow-up question. Like, oh, I didn't know. I thought that my goal here was to listen. Okay. For people that where can people my listeners learn more about you and?
But listen, if you go to my website, it's the easiest way. I mean, you could take, if there are people who are watching this, they can see how my last name is spelled, Chotka. Get onto Google and you'll find all my books and you'll find my website. But my website itself is www.spirit, like Holy Spirit, and equip, like equipment. And if you put the two words together, spiritequip.com, you will find links to all my teaching, all my invitation streams, all the books that I've written and so on. I've got 5 published right now. I've got 2 more that are just about to come out. And so and there's a YouTube channel, there's a Facebook page, there's an Instagram account. It's all linked together on the website.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks so for sharing with us this little bits of wisdom.
It's a joy. So listen, greet the saints in Nigeria. I'm going to be there in a year's time.
Yeah,
So
we'll be expecting you.
God bless you.
You've been listening to Relatable Wisdom, and I've been your host, Wisdom Okonkwo. You've been listening to the podcast where every story, quote, and insight helps you see life a little differently. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow the show on your favorite podcast app and share it with someone who loved the conversation. For more inspiring voices and timeless wisdom, visit relatable.wisdom.com. Until next time, keep living, learning, and collecting wisdom that matters most to you.